Hello, welcome to today's episode of Fly to Freedom, and I'm super happy today to introduce Sabrina Manya, who is a food freedom and intuitive eating coach. She helps chronic dieters heal their relationship with food and their bodies and develop lasting health promoting habits so that they can find true health and freedom from obsession and guilt. Sabrina, welcome to Fly to Freedom.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
It's amazing to have you here. Right, first of all, have to ask you my quick fire questions. So, do you have a favorite sound or smell?
Ooh, good question. Sound, I would say I love the sound of birds chirping. I love that and the sound of like a waterfall. Like
Oh,
nature, waterfall. I live right by a canal, so we have that, and I'm so lucky. And then
wow.
favorite smell. Honestly, the thing that comes up to my mind right now is like the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the morning. I love
Oh,
that smell.
oh, I'm so with you on both of those,
Hmm.
especially the coffee, because at the moment my husband's away and he always brings me coffee in the morning. So I'm really missing that. I have to get up and make it myself.
God,
I
terrible.
know. No, I do miss that about him though. When you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be an actress. Yeah.
Oh,
And I still think that I would have had a lot of fun being an actress. I probably would have wanted to do like comedy movies because I'm just always the one making jokes. But yes, when I was younger, one of my brothers went to high school with a pretty big actress in Montreal at this point, and my mom organized us to have like a play date together so I could read some lines with her. I didn't end up taking that path, but that's what I thought I would become when I was older.
oh, wicked. So, along the lines of acting and stuff, if you were part of a fictional family, what fictional family would you be part of?
Ooh, probably like the Addams family. That's the first thing that popped in my mind. I am the youngest of five kids, so I grew up in a pretty large family, and we would make jokes about how we were like the modern day Addams family. So that's probably the one I would say.
That's so cool. Excellent. So, do you have a party trick or is there one that you'd like to have?
I wouldn't say that this is a party trick, but this is something I do without recognizing it is I love to ask people a lot of questions, and I love to get to know people on a deep level, maybe sometimes too fast. So you'll often find me at parties like asking people some really deep questions, and my boyfriend will come into a conversation. He's like, "Why are you talking about his parents' divorce?" But I really love getting to know people. Like that's my passion. I find it so interesting to hear people's stories. So I would say that just like asking a lot of questions is my thing.
Amazing. That's a really good thing to have.
Mm.
What qualities do you most admire in other people?
Ooh, um, that's a great question. I would say just like someone who's genuine, someone who, when you talk to them, you feel like they're not putting on a face, they don't have a wall up, like they're really just being themselves. They know who they are, they're unapologetic about it, and someone who just shows up as themselves.
Lovely. Yeah, really nice. And last question. If you were given a magic wand and you could change one thing about anything, about yourself, about the world, anything at all, what would you do?
Um, I would do something about the environment. I would do something so that everyone would come together to heal our planet that really needs some healing right now. And I think that's something that involves everyone and that would have a positive impact on absolutely everyone who lives here. So that would probably be the thing that would have the biggest impact if I could change anything.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I'd definitely be with you on that one. So, Sabrina, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you do what you do? What's led you to this place?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I'm a food freedom and intuitive eating coach. And as I also mentioned, that was not the path that I thought that I would end up taking. And just like a lot of people who end up in a career where they're helping others, it's usually because it's something that they would have needed that help with when they were younger. So, a little bit of my backstory: when I was a teenager, I was a synchronized swimmer. So I grew up with very skewed perspectives on body image, and it's a sport that has a lot of eating disorders in it because it is very body image focused. And when I retired from the sport at 16 years old, I was really, really terrified of gaining weight because I had this belief that your body is your worth, right? You are successful if you look a certain way. And that was really my perspective. So I noticed that my hips started getting larger and my thighs started getting bigger. And that wasn't because I was doing anything wrong. It's simply because I was growing into my adult body. But at the time, and we also live in a society that tells you that if you're gaining weight, that means you're doing something wrong, right? It means you're either eating too much or you're eating the wrong things. And so I was like, I'm doing something wrong. And I started panicking because I was so afraid of gaining weight that I did what everyone else would do. I started restricting food. I started doing low carb and counting my calories and being really quote unquote good Monday to Friday. And then I would binge on the weekend or I would binge at night. And so for years, as of the age of 16, I struggled with this yo-yo relationship with food, inconsistent habits, binging, restricting, and then it all turned more severe when I got to university and I got a Fitbit. And now I was able to really be controlling of everything that I did because I saw how many calories I was burning. I was tracking how many calories I was eating through my Fitness Pal. And I am just a very type A, structured, organized person who loves to feel like I'm in control of everything. So, as a lot of eating disorders, this was a means to control. I noticed that, okay, if you just exercise more and you eat less, your body is going to start changing. And I had this belief that the thinner I am, the more people are going to like me. I'm going to have more friends. People are going to want to date me. I'm going to be more popular and I'm going to have this love and happiness. And a lot of people who fall into this trap, it's like the then. When I lose weight, then I'll start living my life. When I lose weight, then I'll be happy. And I lived with this paradigm for years, but I never actually stopped and paused to see, am I actually happy? Because right now I keep losing weight. I got to an underweight status and I was the most miserable I had ever been. I wasn't happy. And so throughout those years, I only recognized this after I had healed my relationship with food, that I was suffering from orthorexia, which is this unhealthy obsession with being healthy. Everything had to be clean and I had to have olive oil. If there was butter in my food, I wouldn't touch it. And I wouldn't go out to restaurants if I didn't know what was going to be in my food and how many calories were going to be in my food. And I eventually, as a lot of people do, hit a rock bottom where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be 80 years old still afraid of gaining weight, still afraid of eating food. I don't want to live the rest of my life this way because I'm not happy and I'm not getting all of these things that I thought that a thinner body would do for me. So I had to take all these steps that stepped out of my comfort zone, that included deleting my Fitness Pal and taking a break from my Fitbit and going to Italy where I was I couldn't control the food that I was eating. And I started noticing that there was a different way of living life. I started noticing the importance of your relationship with food, not the foods that you eat, but why and how you eat them. And it wasn't an overnight process, but I recognize that a lot of people are struggling with this, and I'm not the only one. And this is a message that needs to be more widespread, and more people need to be talking about this because diet culture is so loud and it is so prominent. And we need those voices that are giving a message of compassion, of gentle nutrition, of true, authentic health.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Diet culture kind of promises this mysterious magic will happen, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the promises are all conflicting with each other and don't make any sense, yet they're still alluring and draw people in. This, you'll be happy when, you'll be
Yeah.
happy when. And oh, absolutely. I totally, utterly resonate with the orthorexic side of your story
Hmm.
completely.
Yeah.
Something that I struggled with for ages. I got to the point where I couldn't eat out anywhere. I couldn't have anything that I hadn't made from scratch myself. I
Yes.
was even fermenting my own yogurts. But
Wow.
I know, extreme.
I
Absolutely.
once uh I once tried to make my own Nutella, but it consisted of hazelnuts, I think cocoa powder and water. It was absolutely disgusting. Like I look back on it now and I'm like, what was I thinking? But when you're in that mindset and your social media and your entire environment is reinforcing those behaviors, you don't recognize how screwed up it is until you're out of it.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. I convinced myself I was doing it for my health.
Yes. Yeah.
I was doing everything I could to be really healthy.
Did you
Um,
have this mindset, and I'm not embarrassed, I'm sad to think back to how I used to think, but I don't know if you can relate to this. I used to look at people who would eat white flour, or people who would put sugar in their coffee, or people who weren't obsessive about food and about their health. I would look down on them and be like, wow,
yes,
you really don't care. You must really just not care about your health.
absolutely. Yeah. Which is also really disordered, isn't it? It's,
Yeah.
yeah, it kind of felt like like a bit of a superiority of, yeah, I eat really clean and I make everything from scratch and I do all this exercise and I know exactly what's going in my body. My body is my temple.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but it's exhausting and it's disordered and I was just hungry all the time and I didn't realize how much damage I was doing to myself.
Yes, 100%. I would feel exhausted. I had no energy, and because I didn't recognize, I never made the association that it was the way that I was living that was causing that. I started getting a bunch of blood tests done because I was like, I must be anemic, or there must be something wrong with my hormones because the way that I feel is not normal, but I never ever thought about the fact that, like, oh yeah, you're chronically under eating, you are over exercising, you are not taking real care of yourself. Of course, you feel terrible. And my period was gone for a year and a half. And again, I never made those connections as to what was causing that.
Actually, yes, so much. I thought I was going through a really early menopause and was started on taking HRT and stuff because of all the symptoms I was having with extreme anxiety and hair falling out
Hmm.
and just so many symptoms which were all related to malnutrition.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet the doctors happily put me on HRT. And wow, when I think back, yeah, so much we just think there's something wrong with us when in fact we're starving ourselves
Hmm.
because of diet culture.
Yeah.
So you are very knowledgeable on the psychology of behavior change.
Yes.
So could you tell us, first of all, what is that?
Yeah. So when people start approaching building new habits and changing their behaviors, they usually just think, all right, I don't work out. I'm just going to start working out. we just start working on the actions, right? It seems very simple. And when you look on social media or when you go to a doctor, they always just prescribe the action, right? Like do the thing. Or if you want to eat more fruit, just like put it on your counter, which is not always terrible advice, but there is a psychology underneath the reason why so many people struggle to stay consistent with behaviors. And a lot of people, they either approach it from like 0 to 100, or they focus on the wrong things. And then they end up feeling so frustrated that they can't stick to something and they blame themselves. They think, I can't stick to anything. I'm a failure. And so that perpetuates this cycle because then you don't even want to start something because you don't think you're going to stick to it. And over time, it becomes harder and harder because your perception of yourself, your identity, your beliefs about your capacity to start a new behavior and stick to it diminishes over time. So I love talking about the psychology of behavior change to help people understand why this is not working for you and what actually needs to be addressed and focused on so that you can create a new behavior and you can actually stick to it.
Okay. So, what are some of the things that people do get wrong when they're trying to change behaviors?
Yeah. So we'll focus specifically on like people who are stuck in diet culture because what you'll often see is the all or nothing mentality, right? The way that you do one thing is often the way that you do many things. So you see people who have an all or nothing mentality when it comes to food. Either I'm eating super, super clean and I'm on a diet, or I'm completely off the diet and I'm eating all of the things in sight. And then when we talk about exercise, for example, you'll often hear the same thing. I'm either on the wagon, I'm going to the gym 6 times a week, or I'm not working out at all. So I would say that one of the things, and I'm going to try to make this very clear so that people can understand. One of the things that people don't think about is how does this relate to me and how does it fit into my life? Because people really think about it in the short term. Oh, it just makes sense. I'm going to work out 6 or 7 days a week and I can do that maybe for a couple of weeks. But if you're someone who has kids, for example, and you work crazy long hours and you have this very busy lifestyle, but you're trying to take advice from someone who maybe doesn't have kids, who doesn't have the same lifestyle as you, and it just does not fit into your life, then it's going to feel really difficult to stick to it. So instead of it being something that naturally becomes part of who you are, it feels like a chore and it feels really hard to stick to it because you're like, God, this is so difficult. It feels like a full-time project. If we think about quote unquote healthy eating or exercising, it feels like I have to put my life on hold in order to stick to this habit. And just like anything that you do that you put your life on hold, there's going to be an end date where you're not able to do that anymore. You're not able to stick to that rigid structure and then you're going to break. And because you have this all or nothing mentality, you're probably not going to go from I'm working out 6 days a week to I'm working out maybe 3 days a week. It's usually going to go I'm working out 6 days a week or I'm not working out at all. And people don't like to start small. They don't like to take these habits and break it down to something that seems so easy and almost too easy because they're like, well, what's the point? What's the point of going for a 5 minute walk? What's the point of just taking out my yoga mat if I'm not going to get any results out of it? But the goal as you're starting a habit is actually not to get the results. It's actually not about the habit at all, but it's about becoming the person who shows up consistently and who does something so that you get it in your muscle memory. It starts becoming part of who you are, part of your day, part of your lifestyle, and then you can start building on it.
Okay, so it's a bit like the going all in and going hard, it kind of get new behavior burnout.
Yes, exactly.
Ah. So, how do deeply ingrained beliefs about yourself, oneself, affect the ability to make lasting behavioral changes? And how can these beliefs be shifted?
Yeah. So the beliefs that you have about yourself could be I'm a failure. I never stick to anything. I can't be consistent. Those are the things that you often hear from someone who's been dieting for so long. And your brain loves to be right. So if you keep repeating that to yourself day in and day out, your brain is going to start internalizing that as a truth. A belief is simply a thought that you've told yourself enough times that it has become your truth. And so, what your brain is going to start doing is going to start looking for evidence in your life to prove this belief. So, if you believe that you can't stick to anything, then you're not going to look for evidence in your life to prove the opposite, right? Let's say that you're going on Google and you write down the question, why am I a failure? Google is not going to offer you a response. No, you're not a failure, and here's why. It's always going to want to respond to the question that you asked. And so your brain is the same. If it believes a certain belief, it will start looking for evidence to just prove that belief. So every time that you do a diet and you don't stick to it, your brain's going to go, see, I told you that you can't stick to anything. But there might be a bunch of other pieces in your life that you have stuck consistent with. Maybe you've been at a job for 30 years at this point. Maybe you've been consistent with brushing your teeth every day, but your brain is going to disregard that as not important. Doesn't really matter. I want you to think about, let's say you go for a walk and I don't give you any instructions on this walk. I say, just go for a walk and come back to me. And then you come back to me and I ask you, how many squirrels did you see on this walk? You're probably not going to have noticed the squirrel because you didn't give yourself the instructions to look for them. But if I ask you to go for a walk and I say, I want you to count exactly how many squirrels you notice, you're going to come back. I do this all the time. I'm like, man, there are so many squirrels outside because you are intentional about noticing them. And so, what people do is they don't become intentional about the new beliefs that they want to have. And they just let the old beliefs, usually negative beliefs, because those are easier to retain than new positive beliefs, they let those run on the background. And then what happens is you just start seeing evidence to prove that. So, your beliefs about your own capacity to form a new habit or to stay consistent or to become a different person are so important. I wasn't a big reader in when I was younger, and I really wanted to become a reader. And so what I could have done is I could have said, well, I don't like reading. I don't want to read. Like, this is not who I am. Or I could say, I'm becoming a reader. It's becoming part of who I am. I know that I'm able to build habits because I've have this and this and this to prove that. So I'm going to start by just reading one page a week, one page a day. And that's how I started, just reading one page a day. And after I would read this one page, I would reinforce in my brain, see, you're a reader. And every day it became part of who I was. Oh, I'm a reader. And this belief started showing up. And then you start looking for proof to reinforce this new belief that you are a reader, or you are someone who moves your body every day, or you are someone who goes to yoga, whatever new behavior that you want to form.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's actually how I worked on my body image,
Mm-hmm.
was by looking in the mirror and first of all saying, I'm learning to love you. And then I think I said things like, I like my eyelashes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I can like part of my body because I like my eyelashes. And then just building on that every day, you find you become more and more accepting and in tune with, for me, body image at the time. And yeah, that's really amazing advice.
Absolutely. And for body image, you hit the nail on the head because for someone who is so used to saying, I hate my body and having that belief that there's something wrong with my body, they might not notice those days because body image, no matter what body you're in, is going to fluctuate. There's going to be some days
Definitely.
where you're not going to mind what you see. You might feel neutral about it. And then there's going to be other days where you're going to feel really negative about your body. And
Yeah.
if you are not intentional about the beliefs that you have around your body, you're really only going to notice those extremely negative days. And so those are going to feel like all of your days. But you're not going to notice those days where you're like, oh, today's not that bad. Today, I feel neutral around my body. And if you were to hold on to those days, what you're going to notice is that it's always fluctuating. And I know on those days where I look in the mirror and I'm like, God, I do not love what I see, I can remember, but last week, I didn't mind it. And my body hasn't really changed in the past week. So clearly, body image lives in my mind, right? Because your body does not change drastically from one week to another, but the way that you perceive your body will.
Yes, absolutely. It's the same for hair, isn't it? I can look in the mirror and go, oh my goodness, my hair looks horrendous today. And then the next day I can be like, oh, actually, not having a bad hair day today. Quite like
Mm-hmm.
it. My hair hasn't really changed. It's just
Yeah,
my perception of my hair. Because
exactly.
I think our brains are kind of wired to look on the negative, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a primal instinct because our brains want to keep us safe. They want to
Yes.
keep us comfortable. And that's why it can feel really uncomfortable to start becoming a new person. Let's say you're someone who has never been consistent with moving your body, and you want to become someone who is consistent, who does make working out part of your daily activities. Then, even if it's something that is really good for you, even if it's a very positive change, your brain does not like discomfort. It does not like being something different. And that's why, whenever we're working on healing our relationship with food, healing our relationship with our bodies, being someone different, not just doing something different, right? That's an action, but actually being someone different, it can be very confronting because that's like an identity crisis. I remember I used to be someone who complained all the time. I just had a very negative perspective, very negative mindset all the time. And I remember I got to a point, and this was like around the pandemic, where at the beginning, I just realized I was like, I don't love who I am. And I don't love that this is part of my personality. And I know that I probably could change if I made the effort. And oh my goodness, those first few months were so uncomfortable for me. I started telling people that I loved them. I started being more warm. I started hugging people. I did this 30-day happiness challenge. And one of the things that I had to do is send a letter of appreciation to 5 people in my life. And that was super uncomfortable for me, but I sent it to them, and then I got the most beautiful, heartwarming responses back. And I was like, ooh, this feels kind of good. But at the beginning, becoming a new person, someone who is positive and uplifting and always kind of the light of the room, that was not who I was. And it was very uncomfortable and confronting to my old identity to become that person.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, it's any form of change, anything new, your brain's going to say new, dangerous, uncomfortable, don't do it.
Yeah. I wish that our brains worked like it does when it comes to things that we own. New is always better. Our brains don't
Yes.
operate that way.
How does that, why is that different, hey? Oh, new phone, great. Rather
Yeah.
than new, dangerous, no, don't want it. No,
It's
that's that.
because a new phone, you know what you're getting, right? When you're doing something new in your life, it's uncertain. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily know what that's going to be like. And that's why people love staying in their uncomfortable comfort zone because even though I don't like my life, even though I'm unhappy, I can expect it. I know what's going to happen, and I don't have to make the effort to do
Yeah,
something new and then have the possibility of failing because people have such a negative perspective on failure. They see it as it means there's something wrong with me, and so they don't go after it.
absolutely. So true. But when you start, you realize that failing isn't actually failing, it's just learning what didn't work.
Yeah. There's a beautiful graphic where it's like I'm going to try to describe it. It's this person who's on like this really top level, and it's like your goals. At that point, it's like your goals and the life of your dreams. And to get to that level, it's just a bunch of steps, and each step is a failure. And so the only
Yes.
way for you to become the person that you want to become and have the life that you want to have, you need to fail a lot. And so whenever I'm working with my clients and I'm talking about creating massive impactful changes in their life, I talk about how you should go after failure because every failure, if you have a mindset of looking at it as every failure is going to lead me to the next step, is going to help me
Absolutely.
understand what's working, what's not working, what needs to change. You cannot, no one's successful. Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, no one has achieved where they are now without an incredible amount of failure.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And yeah, it is simply like, okay, that didn't work. So let me try it this way rather than, oh, that didn't work. I'm going to give up.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, can you explain the importance of your identity and habit change?
Yeah. So we talked about your beliefs about yourself, and
Yeah,
then your beliefs, if you go one layer deeper, there's your identity, who you are. So if we're talking about a chronic dieter, for example, they might not introduce themselves as, "Hi, I'm a chronic dieter," but dieting is part of their identity. What you'll often hear is like, "This is just who I am. This is who I've always been." And so if you talk about, all right, well, now I want you to change your habits. I want you to stop restricting food. I want you to start having a better relationship with food, then that will be a shot to your identity. And that is going to be very confronting for you. So let's say you're talking about building a habit. If we go back to the habit of being a reader, for example, I could say that I read books, I'm reading a book. That is an action. It is an identity taking an action, but it could be my old identity of I am not a reader, but I'm reading a book. And that might not stay consistent and it might not become part of who I am, part of my lifestyle, because it's not part of my identity. But if I start talking to people and I talk about my hobbies and I say I'm a reader, every time that I say that, it's part of my identity now. And human beings want to stay consistent with who they believe that they are. So, for example, part of my identity is I am someone who moves my body every day. So, that could be I go for a walk, I stretch, I do yoga, I exercise, I lift, but it's part of who I am. So on those days where I don't move my body, it feels very uncomfortable, not physically, but mentally, because I'm like, man, this is not who I am. I move my body every day. It didn't feel great. So when you are approaching a new habit, this is for anyone who's listening. I want you to think, am I approaching it from the place of I am just starting a new behavior? Or am I approaching it from the mindset of I am becoming a new person?
powerful, very powerful. I've heard many people not only relate to their own identity, but kind of combine it as a family identity as well. Like
Hmm.
the whole family. We are a family of people that don't read. I'm a
Hmm.
family of non-readers. I'm a family of dieters.
Hmm.
and they actually create the identity within the entire family as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it's part of a bigger group, then it's not just your own identity that is at stake, but now it's your belonging in a social group that is at stake. So you'll often hear people who are like, we are a family of trauma, right? So if you're family of trauma, of course, naturally, you don't want to perpetuate trauma, but that can be a big barrier to, all right, I'm going to go to therapy and I'm going to work through this trauma so that I break this cycle. And even though breaking a cycle of trauma is a positive thing, that can be a threat because then maybe your family is going to be like, oh, she's better than us. She's going to therapy, right? You see that often of a family that wants to hold on to their generational cycles, that you start becoming the black sheep, the person who decides, I don't want to do that anymore. So, absolutely, this sense of in group, out group is huge. And it can be a big shot to your identity and your group identity.
Can you explain your 10-step habit blueprint?
Yeah, absolutely. So I in my program Food Freedom Academy, we have a full module on mastering your habits because once you've healed your relationship with food, with exercise, with your body, then we can start talking about self-care habits. How can we create a life of authentic health? And if you don't know how to create a new habit, then you can have all these ideas of I want to start meditating, I want to start exercising, but if you're doing it the wrong way, none of that is going to stick. So I have a 10-step habit blueprint that anyone can go through that will help you start and stick to a new habit. So the first thing that you want to get clear on, and if you're listening right now, take out your notes app, take out a pen and a piece of paper to write this down. And if you want to have access to this blueprint, you can also send me a message on Instagram. Just write blueprint and I'll share it with you as well. So the first question is, what is the new habit that you want to form? So let's say right now you're someone, we'll use the example of, I want to start working out 3 days a week. I want to go to the gym 3 days a week. So the first question is like long game, right? The end goal is, what is the new habit you want to form? I want to start working out 3 days a week. So then the second thing you want to ask yourself is, why do you want to form this new habit? The intention behind it is huge. And I use this concept of the 7 layers of why. So usually the first time that you find your why, it's going to be pretty surface level. We'll often hear things like, I want to lose weight, or I want to be fit, I want to be healthy. But then if you ask yourself, okay, why do you want to be healthy? Well, because I want to feel energized. I want to feel vital. I want to be there for my family. All right, why do you want to be there for your family? Because I want to be 80 years old, still able to pick up my grandkids, for example, right? So keep asking yourself why until you hit that emotional chord. And this should make you feel emotional, because if it drives an emotional reaction, then you're so much more likely to stick to it than if you're just saying, I want to work out to be healthy. Does that make sense so far?
Absolutely. I love the digging deeper with the why, why,
Awesome.
why.
Yeah. So then the third thing is, we're touching on identity now. Who would you have to become to be someone who does this habit consistently? What are her or his values? What are her or his personality traits? Right? So now we're not just talking about doing a behavior or taking action. We're talking about, if you look at someone who works out consistently, or if you look at someone who reads consistently, what do they value? For example, I really value education. I love learning. I love understanding people. I love getting to come into a conversation and talk about anything because I've read and I've understood that. So, who do you have to become to be someone who does this habit consistently? Then the fourth question is, let's break it down. Okay, so using the 2-minute rule, what is the smallest first step that you can take this week to begin working towards your new habit? So, for example, if you want to, your end goal is 30 minutes a day for 3 days a week, let's break it down. If you're starting at zero, what is something so small? Maybe that means putting your running shoes on. Or if putting your running shoes on seems a little too simple, maybe it's putting your running shoes on and stepping outside the door and going for a 2-minute walk, right? Breaking it down to something that is so easy to do that you can be consistent with it. And the reason behind this is you want to start building up that belief that you can stick to this. This is something that's doable. And every time you do it, I want you to pat yourself on the back and say, I did it. And I don't want you to say, this was nothing, it doesn't count, because every time that you do that, you're reinforcing this old belief. So 2-minute rule, what is something that you can break it down to make it so small? And then the next step is rate your confidence in sticking with your 2-minute habit on a scale from 1 to 10. So if it's not a 7 on 10 or above, make it easier. If you don't believe that you can step outside and go for a walk every day this week, for example, then make it easier. Just put your running shoes on, because the goal is not to set yourself up for failure. It's actually to set yourself up for such easy success. Because again, remember, this is about your belief. This is about who you are. This is about becoming someone new. So you do not want to reinforce this old belief that you can't stick to anything. Do you have any questions about this so far?
No, I don't have questions. I love the celebrating yourself for achieving it, because our brains love praise. Like kids with sticker charts and puppies with treats, we love praise. And when we
Yeah,
can praise ourselves, our brains start to look for more reasons to get that praise.
exactly. Exactly.
That's
And that could be
huge.
as small as high-fiving yourself in the mirror, patting
Yeah,
yourself on the back, saying out loud, I did it, I stay consistent with it.
yeah.
All of that matters. So if we move on to the next step, it's the how. So use an implementation intention or something called habit stacking. And this is coming from James Clear from his book, Atomic Habits, which is an incredible book. So this is where you make a plan beforehand about when and where you're going to do this 2-minute habit. Your brain likes to know this ahead of time, because a lot of people live on autopilot. They live in survival mode. And in the moment, your brain will operate on the law of least effort. I want to do the easiest thing. A lot of the time, the easiest thing is to do nothing. So if you want to go for a walk every morning, right when you get up, for example, tell your brain ahead of time, every morning, you have to see it in your mind's eye. I'm going to put my alarm off. I'm going to get up. I'm going to brush my teeth, and I'm going to go for a walk right away, so that it's easier to get it done. And then step number 7 is make it easier for yourself. Is there any way that you can change your environment to create visual cues or make future actions easier? So for example, that might be putting your running shoes right by your bed so that you wake up and you see them right there. Or it might be using an app to remind you, or having a reminder on your phone. So using technology. So what are some things, putting a post-it maybe on your mirror, go for a walk so that you don't forget, because as you're starting a new habit, it's not going to be natural. It becomes natural when you practice it enough and you have that muscle memory and it's part of who you are. So at the beginning, you do want to have some cues, some things that make it easier for you. The 8th thing is accountability. So how are you going to keep track of your consistency with this 2-minute habit? Maybe you're going to have a little paper where you're going to check it off every day, or you're going to tell your partner to ask you every day, how did your walk go? So is there a way that you can hold yourself accountable? Question 9 is looking forward and using 1 to 3 max of your most common barriers and obstacles. So what might get in your way? You want to think about that ahead of time. So let's say it's raining in the morning and you don't want to go for a walk. What can you do instead? Maybe you'll stretch for 2 minutes instead, or maybe you'll do a little 2-minute workout at home, or maybe you're going to go after work instead, or maybe you're just going to bring an umbrella. So looking at the most common obstacles that might get in their way, and you want to think about what those are going to be. And then question 10 is your contingency plan. So if an obstacle does happen, so if it rains, then I will. And then what are you going to do instead? So those are the 10 steps to building any new habit.
I love that. And they do absolutely work, because especially with the habit stacking, I wanted to have a daily practice of gratitude and intention setting. So I combined it with my morning coffee, which I never forget to have.
Mm-hmm.
And I put a notebook and a pen on my bedside table so that they're really obvious. So I sit in bed and have a coffee and do my gratitude and intention setting for the day. And I realized that what could quite easily get in my way was technology, was some form of notification coming through on my phone that would
Mm-hmm.
distract me from doing it. And then I would pick up my phone and start getting lost in whatever had come through on the phone. And so, yeah, I now don't even bring my phone upstairs so that it can't get in the way, it can't distract me. And yeah, it works really well, and I'm really,
Absolutely.
really enjoying doing this, and I actually find that I'm proud of myself for doing it. My day
Mm-hmm.
is starting calmer, better, and I'm full of appreciation because I've done a gratitude practice,
Yeah.
and
I
yeah.
think of when someone thinks about creating a new morning routine, for example, what they'll do is they're like, all right, now I just hit the snooze button, I get up and I leave for work. But I want to create this morning routine where I'm going to meditate, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to walk. Like they have all these ideas and they try to do it all at the same time. And I have a very elaborate morning routine. I am a creature of habit and it sets me up for the day. So I will wake up, I'll meditate, I'll journal, I'll read, I'll exercise, I'll go for a walk, I'll make breakfast, and then I start work. And someone might hear that and be like, oh my God, that sounds so overwhelming. I could never. But it didn't start that way. And that's what people need to understand is it started with me getting up and working out. That was the first thing that I did. And I stayed consistent with that for years before I started adding more and more and more to it. And now I look at it and I'm like, okay, if I were to add something else to it, how would that feel? And the truth is, I can't. I can't. And I know that if I tried to add something else to it, it wouldn't stick. And then I'd feel bad about it not sticking. So I'm happy with how it is now. So, really making sure that you are not putting pressure on yourself to go from I'm doing nothing to I'm doing everything because building new habits and creating a new lifestyle, it takes time, it takes consistency, and it takes patience. And not everyone is willing to do that. They would rather go from 0 to 100. But the thing is, when you go from 0 to 100, you'll be right back to zero and you're going to keep doing that for the rest of your life. And if you just focus on doing a 1% improvement every day, it's going to be exponential and you're going to be somewhere completely different a year from now.
Absolutely. And the other problem with doing the 0 to 100 is when it doesn't work because it's unsustainable, you then shame yourself and
Yeah.
start telling yourself you're a failure, you can't stick to anything, you're just not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up worse off than when you started.
Yeah.
Wow. That is so, so helpful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you actually have a workshop going on soon, don't you?
I do, yes. So I will be running a free week-long event in January. I believe it's starting January 4th. That is the current set date for it. And it's going to consist of 3 trainings. And this is for anyone, any women specifically, who feels obsessed with food, who feels like you think about food constantly. You wake up to the moment you go to bed, you're thinking about food, you're thinking about your body. You feel a lot of guilt and a lot of shame when you're eating, and you feel out of control around food. Like the second that you start eating, you just can't stop. So that's really what this is going to about. This workshop is going to be about. It's going to be how to stop feeling obsessed with food. So I'm going to share my most powerful framework to help you start rebuilding a healthy and joyful relationship with food.
Amazing. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I will put the links of how people can get hold of you into the show notes.
Yes, yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to leave the listeners with?
Ooh, good question. I would say that given that this whole episode was about behavior change and becoming someone new, it is so easy to get impatient and to think about I want results and I want them now. But whenever you're starting something new or whenever you're considering becoming someone different or going after healing your relationship with food or exercise, instead of looking at it as what do I want right now, I want you to think about what does the future version of myself want. So I always make all of my choices and all of my decisions from that point of view of, okay, if I do this now, what will my life look like when I'm 60 or 70 years old? And I find this helps you think more in the long term because it's so easy to think, well, if I go for a walk 5 minutes a day, like that means nothing. Yeah, but if you go for a walk 5 minutes a day and then it builds into 10 minutes a day and then it builds into you work out 3 days a week, 4 days a week, then imagine the person you're going to be when you're 60 or 70 years old. So instead of looking at it from this like short term perspective, try to elongate it and think about that future version of yourself.
That's great advice. Absolutely fantastic advice. Thank you so much for coming on and being a guest. It's been just amazing listening to you and sharing so much fantastic advice about starting new habits and how not to start new habits as well, which is also really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So, and thank you everyone for listening. And I will see everyone next week. Thank you, Sabrina, for being my guest.
Thank you for having me.